Army of Darkness update survivor tier list for Evil Dead the game. Before we jump into it, let me just say this tier list is obviously going to be based around a lot of the changes that have just happened in the most recent update. There's been a lot of nerfs and buffs on both sides that have kind of impacted not just the strength of some of these survivors, but also the meta itself and how useful these characters are. And the more important thing is that I will probably move some of these characters up and down the list just based on how I feel about them. Like maybe they weren't actually changed at all in the last update, but I've changed my opinion on where they should be rated just because I've spent a lot more time playing with them and they've just become less useful because maybe demon strategies have changed and things like that. And my opinion on them has changed, even if nothing about the character itself has actually changed. And the most important thing I want to say before we get started is, if I rate your favorite character D tier or something like that, it's lower on the tier list, don't take it as like a personal insult. All right, so if I rate somebody low on the tier list, it's not because I think they're trash or unplayable. It's just that I think that they don't do the things that they do well as the characters above them do the things that they do well. All right, that doesn't mean that you can't have insane games, because inevitably when I put something in D tier, somebody's going to comment and be like, well, actually, Sledge, I had a game with that character you said was D tier where I did 270,000 damage. Great, I don't care. You can have crazy games and pop off with any character in this game. It's one of the main draws of this game and why this game is so awesome. Every single one of these characters can be good in the right hands. All I'm saying is I don't think that they have the same versatility or as the survivors that are above them. That's all I'm saying, okay? Doesn't mean they're not helpful, doesn't mean they're not good in other ways. I just don't think that they're as good as the survivors above them for various reasons. All right, let's jump right into it. Right here in D tier, first tier D tier, Support Ash. Support Ash received the most significant changes in this most recent patch. The biggest among them is the fact that now they no longer do a flat rate of healing. Their healing is now a percentage, and that percentage, I believe, is 20%. And this is not really a nerf or a buff. It's just a change because it can be a buff if he can find a super high rarity weapon. So if he finds a legendary hunting knife, he's going to heal for way more than he did before this patch. If he doesn't find a super high rarity 5-speed, 3-speed weapon, then he's going to heal for a lot less. So the vast majority of your matches, it's probably going to be a net nerf, and he's going to be healing for a lot less than he was before. His marked target has been changed to where before he would headshot something and then the next hit to follow up, whether it was melee or ranged, would then get a heal and it would deal bonus damage. Now that's been changed to where when he marks something, it is marked for 5 seconds. The follow-up hit can no longer be melee, it has to be ranged. And the amount that you heal for and the amount of damage you deal is a little bit less. So that one is another one that's kind of a little bit of a change, not really a buffer or a nerf. Depending on the circumstance, it's worse. Depending on the circumstance, it's better. The main thing that I want to focus on is his melee. The majority of the time, his melee is worse because at 20%, in order to deal the same amount of flat rate healing that he dealt before, he usually needs to use a weapon that has very high damage. The ones that have very high damage are typically big two-handed weapons that have a 1 speed and swing super, super slow. So your overall healing per second, if you will, is much lower than it used to be. The other issue is that now that it's a percentage of your melee, you pretty much have to invest into melee damage in your perk tree, so it gives you less versatility for your build, because now it's basically a requirement to go melee damage on him in order to maximize the amount of healing that he gives out. So overall, I think that puts him strictly as the worst character in the game now, and that's a shame, and I'm not really sure what you could do to fix him. You could certainly up the amount of damage or the amount of health that he heals for. You could change it from like 20% to 30%. I think it'd be really interesting to lower it to like 10 or 15%, but make it so that it's a percentage that applies on any attack and don't limit him to just heavies. I'd like to see something like that, just because using heavy attacks is really annoying, especially on support, because it could get interrupted, and light attacks just seem to be better for that. But we'll see what they decide to do. After him, I've got Arthur here in D tier. His buddy down here in D tier is Lord Arthur. I've really fallen out of love with leaders in general since the last tier list that I made. Every time I see a leader in a match now in solo queue, I always feel like, man, I wish we had just brought a second warrior instead. That's just how it feels now, especially with the balance bar changes and how much easier it is to break balance bars in the early game. I would almost always rather see a second warrior. And Arthur is particularly bad because he specializes in increasing melee damage. Now, in the previous tier list, he had a bug where the melee damage increase that he was applying was also applying to range damage when it wasn't supposed to be. That has since been fixed, so now he's much, much worse. Also, that needed to be fixed. I'm not advocating saying that it should have stayed that way. It needed to be fixed, but it does make him a lot worse. The worst part of the fact that he increases melee damage is that we're starting to see now that warriors don't really care so much about melee damage. Warriors mostly care now about balance bar, tankiness, dismemberment. So on the list of priorities, it's usually going to be somewhere like balance bar, tankiness, dismemberment, and then all the way down here at number 4 is how much actual melee damage they're dealing. So that makes Arthur pretty bad, because the thing that he's increasing, warriors typically don't care about that. So excuse me if I cough at all, because I am a little sick. He did get a buff where his Lord's Wrath, his level 25 ability that extends his Lord's Wrath whenever he performs a finisher, has been changed from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. It's a good change, but the problem that I've run into when I've played Arthur is that because he needs to keep using finishers to keep that up, if you're at stages in the game where it's really important to use that, where it's at the dagger or the pages and beyond, most of the time, your warriors, your hunters, whoever, your big damage dealers who get in there and do a bunch of work, are clearing out all the mobs, and then there's a lull in combat where the demons got everything on cooldown, and you don't have anything to do. You don't have anything to hit, and then the timer runs out, and now your ability's on cooldown. That happens so often when I'm doing dagger and pages. It's really annoying, and it really lowers the effectiveness of Lord Arthur overall. And this tier list, which I didn't mention in the beginning, I probably should have, is based around solo queue. A lot of these characters, their effectiveness is going to change quite a bit if you're playing in a coordinated group. In a coordinated group, you could probably always make sure to leave a unit there for Arthur to hit to keep his ability up. But in solo queue, that's usually not going to happen, and that makes it really hard to get the maximum benefit from Lord Arthur. Speaking of leaders, this is probably my biggest, most controversial change. This guy in my last tier list was all the way up at S tier, and now he's all the way down in C tier, and I think that's the most significant change that will happen in this tier list. as far as shifting from one tier to another. Like I said, I've really fallen out of love with leaders. Leader Ash in particular, I'm kind of down on right now because, again, he increases damage. His El Jefe increases damage, and his El Jefe Grande doubles that, as well as providing that fear resistance. But just speaking strictly on his damage increase, his damage increase, like I mentioned with Lord Arthur, warriors don't care about damage as much anymore. Hunters do. Hunters do care about damage. But if that's the case, you're better off bringing Annie, because Annie is better at increasing your range damage. So he kind of sucks in that regard for damage. For his fear resistance was still really good. I still really like his fear resistance. However, we're at a point in the game now where players have gotten really good at like dropping their weapons when they're about to get possessed, which nullifies a lot of the effectiveness of possessing actual players. Most demons, it seems like, tend to not even really try to possess players as much anymore. They just spam possessing basics and elites now as much as they can, especially like in mid to late game. They can't do it as much early game anymore. So it's become less of a big deal to do that with Leader Ash, to prevent that with Leader Ash, because now players have gotten a lot better at just not only managing their fear, but also dropping their weapon, like I said. The only reason he's not even in D tier is because I do like his show up and blow up ability. That has become more effective early game, because now it's even easier to break basic units balance bars in the early game, so it's nice for that. It's still not as effective like mid to late game. So that's one of the main reasons he's in C tier and not in D tier, is I still do like his show up and blow up ability. But yeah, that's why I got Leader Ash here in C tier. Yeah, boy. Let me just say, shout out to Scotty mains. Scotty mains, more so than any other character that I put on this tier list, got the most tilted that I had him lower on the tier list. Last time I had him in D tier. He has now moved up to C tier. He's moved up one tier. Hey, Scotty mains, that's a win, all right? He's moved up one tier. The reason I moved him up a tier is because I think Warriors as a class in general has just gotten much better because of the nerf to basic unit possessions in the early game. So being able to damage balance bars has become a much more effective strategy, and as a result, Scotty has become better. He did receive a slight buff where now his AoE damage ability has gone from 100 to 150. So he got a little bit buff to that. So now he deals a little bit more damage. Was it 150 or was it more than that? I always forget. I always second guess myself when I make these. Doesn't matter. Point is, he does more damage now. That's a good thing. It helps him a little bit more, because now I've always thought that the way they envisioned that Scotty would be played is you would be using heavy attacks to chip away at units around you. And then once they are low enough, you hit one big Q, kill a bunch of units at the same time. And then that feeds into his ability that lowers his fear. And that's kind of where the combo comes in. One of the reasons I think he's all right is that he could really go hard into like balance bar damage, and then his heavy attacks that he uses on a unit will apply that to everything that is around him. I will say that when I made my last tier list, I was not aware of a Scotty bug that allowed him to use a heavy attack, and then he could use his Q ability, and it would apply the damage from his last attack to his Q. That's a pretty crazy combo there. It would appear in my testing so far that that has now been fixed. So anyone who maybe in that last tier list might be like, well, he's actually really good because there's a bunch of exploits you could use with him that make him really good. There was another one that made it to where he could heavy and then dodge cancel out of it, and it wouldn't use stamina. So there's a bunch of bugs going on with Scotty that I wasn't even aware of. As far as I'm aware, those things have been fixed now. So I think that puts him solidly in C tier. All right, B tier. First, I'm going to put Amanda up here. I think all the hunters in the game are still really good. But I just think that Amanda is a little bit lower on the hunter totem pole because she specializes in pistols, and pistols suck. And if you give her a pistol, now she's especially deadly because if she gets possessed and you don't drop your weapon, she's pretty much going to guaranteed kill somebody. Because she's going to be able to stun lock you and just go to town. And you don't really want to use pistols anyway because they are terrible ammo-wise. You're going to chew through ammo super fast. You'd be better off using a revolver, but her pistol mastery doesn't apply to the revolver, unfortunately. So she's kind of on the weaker side for hunters. Her Q ability is still really good, though. Her Q ability is especially good for like the explosive crossbow, because if you use the explosive crossbow, like I had mentioned in my ranged weapon tier list, where you use it as a means to clear out mobs, she's probably second best at doing that compared to Ed, because Ed gets that weapon mastery with his crossbow, which is really nice. But the biggest issue you'll run into if you use that is you'll run out of ammo. And because she could use her Q, that helps mitigate that downside. So her Q is kind of why she's in B tier instead of like C tier. So I still really like her Q. Hunters in general are still an amazing class. You should always have one in every match. Even after the nerfs, they still do really crazy damage. So hunters are still really good. It's just that she is her gameplay is kind of centered around the pistol. And the pistol just isn't a good weapon to be centered around right now. Joining her in B tier is Kelly. Kelly has similar problems to Amanda, where yes, she's a hunter, and hunters are always good, but Kelly is at a point where she's kind of built to be a hybrid character, and you don't really want to be a hybrid character as a hunter. You really don't want to be meleeing too often. I'm a little iffy on this. Like I could see Kelly in A tier, and let me tell you why. If you were to play Kelly, in fact, I am going to put Kelly in A tier right now. Here, I just talked myself out of it. Here's why. I said you don't want to melee a lot of. That's true when it comes to possessed units, but for basic mobs, you do want to melee, because the ideal way to play hunter. And I saw somebody comment this on one of my videos where they're like, you should use a hunter to clear out basic mobs. No. Do not do that. You're free to have that opinion. I seriously disagree. The only exception to that would be with the explosive crossbow, because you could get 2 to 3 to 4 kills in one shot. If you have to use like your shots on basic units, it's not good for managing your ammo, and you're going to run the risk of running out of ammo at the stage when you need it most, which is at the book. And right now, because it's so easy to take down the book as a demon, that's like the number one strat right now with basic units being nerfed in the early game. People are really going hard on like bosses and elites now and attacking the book. If you run out of ammo at that stage, you lose. So it's not worth the risk. But having said that, the reason that I would put Kelly in A tier is that the way you want to play hunters typically is save your ammo for when a possessed unit shows up, and your warrior should immediately start mailing that possessed unit. And once they're stunned and they're all lined up for a headshot, and then ideally you're going to be using like a shotgun, run up to them, shoot them in the head, and you're going to, two tap them, 3 tap them, whatever it is, and they're out of there. That's the ideal way to play. So that means that when a possessed unit is not on the field, that you want to be meleeing so you could save your ammo, conserve your ammo as much as possible. Kelly's level 25 ability that increases her melee damage isn't really relevant in that regard. It was bugged before this patch that made it to where her ability of also increased her range damage. It doesn't do that anymore. That has since been fixed. So she doesn't care so much about that ability because her melee damage isn't really relevant, but her ability that increases her effectiveness with a meat hammer is actually really, really good because of how much it affects a basic unit's balance bar. So it makes, as long as she can find a meat hammer, it makes it really, really easy for her to go around and F-chain on units, which is a big deal because it prevents her from taking damage. It allows her to be more effective in combat without needing to rely on her ammo to do so. So she is very good at being super effective in the way that you should be playing as a hunter, which is saving your ammo for when you really truly need it against possessed units and otherwise going around and meleeing. So for that reason, I just talked myself out of it and moved her up a tier to A tier. But going back down to B tier now, we got Pablo up here. Pablo has moved up a little bit. Pablo in B tier, nothing, the only thing that has changed about Pablo is that the range that he heals people has been changed from 5 meters to 8 meters. So that's a buff for him and support Ash. It turns out to be a nerf for Cheryl, but we'll get into that in a minute. The reason that he's moved up, though, is that because basic unit possessions in the early game for the demon has been nerfed, it has now become a more effective strategy to rush map pieces. And it's also become a much safer strategy to rush map pieces because now basic units are not this devastatingly effective unit to the point where if you get caught by a demon in the early game, you're just dead and there's no fighting back. That was a huge risk for Pablo before, where if he ran off on his own, a smart demon could check his map in the early game. Once he sees there's a Pablo in the lobby, he could see there's a car moving on the map, go run him down and just annihilate him. Now demons can kind of still do that, but not as well as they could before. So now Pablo has a little bit of a fighting chance. For the most part, he can't really fight back, but demons are not as just devastatingly lethal in the early game as they were before. So now he at least has a chance to run away and retreat to somewhere to where he can save himself, whether that's a car or a window. So it's not as risky for him to go off now. And if he rushes map pieces, that's a pretty effective strategy because of how weak demons are in the early game now. So like if he gets all the map pieces found in the first 3 minutes and you go and start the dagger and the demon's only at like level 6 or 7, that's a massive advantage for the survivor team. So that's why he's moved all the way up here to B tier, is because he is the best character at rushing those map pieces, and rushing map pieces has become a very effective strategy with the most recent demon nerfs. Joining Kelly in A tier, while we're on the topic of supports, let's talk about Cheryl. Cheryl actually received a slight nerf with this most recent patch. She had a bug going on that made it to where her healing range was increasing with her level, so it maxed out at something like 15 meters. So now that's been nerfed down to 8, while the other two supports have been buffed up from 5. So her healing range is now less, but she's still the queen. She's still the best healer. The main reason for that is that carrying 2 extra shemps is a really big deal. I can't tell you how much that really saves you. Getting to heal for 100 extra health over the course of a match is a really big deal. The nice thing about her too is that she really specializes in speccing into range damage. And I think the best way to play Cheryl is to bring like a revolver and help with taking out ads, taking out trash mobs. And if you do that and you bring a revolver and you spec into range damage, You can one tap basic units with headshots, and then you become a really significant contributor to combat as a support. And on top of that, because you're playing as a range character, you're staying out of the melee scrum, and that helps mitigate how much damage you take. And then that way, if you keep an eye on your team's health, you could be headshotting things and really helping your team. You see somebody's low, you dip into range, drink a Shemps, and dip back out. And so she's just so good at that. She's an amazing healing character. I love Cheryl. I still think she's the best in the game. And being able to carry those 2 extra Shemps is a huge deal. And sometimes even her ability to lower fear when she drinks a Shemps can come up clutch as well. I wouldn't recommend doing that purely to lower fear, but it can come up clutch in a pinch when characters need both a heal and a little bit of fear reduction. So Cheryl, I still think, is the queen of healers in this game. Annie, we got up here at A tier. A for Annie. I have Annie in A tier because the 2 things that I think you would care about most as a leader are the 2 things that she's good at. So we talked about this when I went over Leader Ash, but the damage she increases is range damage, both with her just innate aura ability and with her Q, her active ability. Both of those increase your range damage. That's a really big deal, especially with hunters now after the nerf, when their damage has been nerfed. That's going to allow you to take down units that need to be taken down quickly, such as bosses, that much faster, which is very, very helpful. And that damage increase is basically going to make hunters be as effective as they were at killing possessed units pre-patch. You're going to be like 2-tapping units with a boomstick when Annie activates her Q. Also, that kind of makes her like a pseudo hunter herself, and that's typically how I would play a leader. Is I'd be contributing to hurting a balance bar with my leader, and then once that unit that we're working on is stunned, I pull out whatever range weapon I have and headshot them. And what does Annie also do? He increases balance bar damage, which is a huge deal. So like Leader Ash increases the amount of damage you do. Warriors don't really care about that. Annie increases the balance bar damage you do. Warriors really care about that. And the damage, the actual health damage that Annie increases is for hunters, for range damage, and they really care about that. So the 2 things that warriors and hunters respectively care about the most, she helps buff you in. So that's why I've got Annie in A tier. Even still, I think I would rather have a second warrior, but if you were ever going to bring a leader instead of a second warrior, Annie's the one you want to bring, because balance bar is king right now, and her range damage increase helps nullify the nerf that hunters just received across the board. Also here at A tier, I've got Henry the Red. Henry the Red is still great because his Q, I would say that his Q, his active ability, is arguably the best in the game. It's certainly the most versatile. The fact that you could use it when a boss is focusing you and just prevent them from dealing any damage to you is crazy. He could use it to revive a person off of the ground for free. He could use it to revive somebody at an altar for free. His Q ability is just nuts. And I can't tell you how many times I've played as Henry the Red and I've literally carried a game because the demon just cannot stop me from constantly rezzing my teammates. Because if you get really good and you spec into balance bar damage, you could get to the point where even after your team is completely dead, you could just F-chain on units all day, all night until your active ability is off cooldown again, and then you res everybody again. So like if you are good enough with Henry the Red, you're basically going to get to the point where the only way the demon's ever going to be able to beat you is if he beats you on timer. That's how crazy Henry the Red can get. The only reason I have him in A tier instead of S tier is because a lot of his other abilities are really bad. You know, increasing health and shield by 10% is nothing and just not very good. That extra tankiness is typically just not that important. Warriors are kind of already tanky as it is, and a tiny bit extra tankiness just isn't a huge deal for a warrior. You'd probably rather have like more balance bar damage or more damage overall or something like that. So that's the only reason I have him in A tier instead of S tier, but his Q ability, his active ability is so good that pretty much alone is putting him in A tier. All right, here we're down to the final three. First here we've got AOD Ash. AOD Ash is back up to S tier. Nothing about him has really changed. I have him back up in S tier just because my opinion on him has changed. Even with the nerfs to both his active ability and his big shield blast ability, he's still an amazing character because of how stupidly versatile he is. His Q ability, much like Henry the Red's, it could do so many different things. You could use it as a way to mitigate damage when you're fighting a possessed unit or like a boss. You could use it to stop fear, like if you get jump scared and you think that jump scare is going to put you over the threshold and you're going to get possessed, you could drink it and stop that fear from going up dead in its tracks. You could use it to top yourself off if you're sitting at like 80% health. You could drink it, top yourself off, and then get the benefit of that perk that increases your damage if you're at 95% health or greater. There's so many things you could do with his Wiseman's Brew. The Wiseman's Brew is just really good. The ability to generate his own shields is always good. And then no matter how much they nerf his shield blast ability, the ability to basically do a light Scotty maneuver on demand without needing to be in an animation is just crazy. And the fact that he could get a shield back pretty much whenever he wants is also nuts. And he specializes, his weapon mastery is in the chainsaw. And the chainsaw is one of the better weapons in the game. And it just got buffed. Its dismemberment damage is even better now. So AOD Ash, tons of versatility. Warriors in general are much better now. So AOD Ash, I have back up at S tier. Then we got Evil Dead 2 Ash. Evil Dead 2 Ash moves back up to S tier because of the basic unit possession nerf specifically. Now the game is at a point where his active ability to exercise units is absolutely devastating in the early game. So if a demon possesses a unit in the early game and you hit Q on them, it's devastating. There's no other word to use. It's devastating to the demon to do that now. So his possession, his exorcism ability has become much better by virtue of the demon being nerfed in the early game. And then it's also better in like mid to late game when possessions become better than they were before, because now it's just that much more important to just insta erase a possessed unit. So his active ability is much better now. He's still a great character because of his weapon mastery and the double barrel. The double barrel is one of the best weapons of the game. It's you know, if you watch my range video, it's A tier, just below S tier with the boomstick. It's just fantastic for taking out possessed units, and it's great that he gets to start with one, so he doesn't even have to look for it. It's really irritating, like if I'm playing Ed and I'm looking for an explosive crossbow because I've decided that's how I want to play for this match. It's really annoying to spawn in with him and then I can't find a freaking explosive crossbow until like halfway through the match. And by then, the damage is already done. The demon's already chipped away at us enough because I haven't contributed in combat as much as I'd like. That's why it's nice that Evil Dead 2 Ash, Hunter Ash, gets to start with his double barrel. So if you can't find something better, his trusty old white double barrel is still really, really good. I will say that he did get hit hard by the nerfs. The white double barrel is not nearly as effective as it used to be with and the weird thing too is like, this is really bizarre. So they didn't nerf white weapons, but I swear to God they did. It's the most bizarre thing. I was playing as Evil Dead 2 Ash, and I picked up his double barrel, and I swear, even with a white double barrel, I was like killing boss units in like 2 to 3 shots, usually 3. Now it takes like 6 to 7 shots with a double barrel on an Evil Ash with my barrel just stuffed in his head. Maybe some of that's because boss units have been buffed to where they have more health now. That's probably what it is, to be honest. But yeah, even still, I guess you could classify that as a technical nerf to hunters because now they're not as effective as killing bosses. But he's still an S tier. I just wanted to add that in case somebody brings that up. And then at the very tippy top of the Survivor tier list, look at my boy Ed Getley up here. And to think there was a time when he was in the lowest tier, and now he is the best character in the game. Where did we go wrong? How did Ed get here? He's the best character of the game, and to be completely honest, it's not even particularly close, folks. He is by far the best character in the game right now. The main reason for that is that his level 25 collector ability is absolutely out of control. This thing seems to be spawning loot every time something dies, just left and right. Like, you basically don't have to worry about ammo with how much ammo it spawns. You're going to be stocked up on a ton of shems, a ton of amulets throughout the match because of it. And it seems like you're pretty much guaranteed to find a legendary chest whenever you bring this guy. The amount that he increases the rarity of chest buy seems to be nuts. It's very, very noticeable after that ability got buffed in the patch just before this one. And he is just crazy. And his ability to shut down traps, even though the patch before this one, that got nerfed, and now it's on a longer cooldown. Still really crazy, still really helpful, particularly like in the early game, because that's one of the demon's few tools now that basic unit possessions is nerfed, is being able to trap things and get you to walk into those. If he just completely shuts all that down, it's crazy. His ability to like disable chest traps is really crazy. Like, now he could just hit that, and if he sees a bunch of chests everywhere that he knows the demon is probably trapped, he could just activate his flashlight and get rid of it. It's really good. Ed is just crazy right now. And they gave him another buff. Well, technically it was a nerf and a buff. So they nerfed his weapon mastery with his crossbow from 20% to 10%, but they changed it to where it applies to both the regular crossbow and the explosive crossbow. I see it as a net buff because the crossbow stinks, and you don't want to take it very often because of how hard it is to hit headshots with. But the explosive crossbow is nuts. If you saw my ranged weapon tier list, the explosive crossbow is out of control. And if you decide to go that route and be someone who takes out trash mobs instead of focusing on high damage to take out possessed units, explosive crossbow is the way to go. And the amount of damage he's going to be dealing with that because of his weapon mastery is so crazy that you're going to be one-shotting every basic unit that you shoot. You don't even really have to aim. You can just shoot at their feet. They're going to die. And that basically means that anytime you're on like dagger pages and the demon spawns a basic unit portal and 3 units come pouring out of it, shoot at the ground, boom, it kills all 3 units instantly before the demon can even do anything. That's crazy. That's really, really strong. So Ed is still just ridiculous, and I think he's the best character in the game now by far. So that is the Survivor tier list for the most recent Army of Darkness update. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know where you would put some of these people. Please be as respectful as possible. If you disagree with any of these ratings, I got no problem with anybody disagreeing with anything that I say, as long as you're respectful and we could have an open and honest discussion about things. But let me know what you think about this tier list in the comments below. If you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate you. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I apologize for my voice. I'm still very, very sick. That's probably why my voice has given up on me as I get towards the end of this video. But if you made it this far, I really appreciate you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.